Operator, today's conference is scheduled to begin in approximately 5 minutes. Until that time, your lines will again be placed on hold. Thank you for your patience. I now turn the call over to Ms. Elaine Arkin.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for the Connect and Explore webinar this afternoon. As you heard, I'm Elaine Arkin with the Coordinating Center, and I'll be facilitating the call this afternoon. Our special spotlight today is called Looking Back and Looking Forward, 9 years of school district wellness policy implementation. And in addition to our presentation, just after that, we'll have time for you to ask questions of our speaker. So anytime you have questions, you can put them in the chat room, and we'll be monitoring those. We'll also have a brief preview of upcoming NCCOR events at APHA and beyond, so stay tuned for that. If you have a question, it goes right here where you can see from the arrow to the chat box. Also, if you need technical assistance, let us know using that same chat box, and we'll get back to you quickly. And if you have trouble logging into the webinar but can hear us on the phone, please email us at NCCOR, NCCOR, at F as in Frank, HI360.org, and we'll work with you to resolve the problem and get you on the webinar. Finally, one important technical issue. If you're listening to our webinar using your computer speakers, please turn down or mute your computer microphone. This will greatly reduce the potential for background noise since we have so many people joining us today. So thanks a lot, everyone. We'll also be live tweeting during the webinar today. If you are on Twitter or other social media, we encourage you to join the conversation using the hashtag ConnectExplore that you can see on the screen and following the Twitter handle at NCCOR. Today's speaker is Jamie Chriqui. We're very pleased to have Dr. Chriqui, who is a professor of health policy and administration and co-director of the Health Policy Center in the Institute for Health Research and Policy at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Public Health. Her research focus is on studying obesity and other chronic disease-related policies nationwide and their impacts on communities, schools, and individual behaviors. She's been a member of 2 recent IOM obesity prevention committees. She's a member of the Community Prevention Services Task Force and has numerous policy research grants and publications. She was recently awarded a new grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to serve as co-PI for a Policies for Action research hub focusing on children's health and weight issues. Now, before we get started with Dr. Chriqui's presentation, we just want to start with a brief poll. If you would, the poll should be coming up on your screen, and if you would just quickly answer one question. Are you familiar with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Wellness Policy Final Rule, which was issued in July? So that'll give Dr. Chriqui a little bit of understanding of who you are listening today. We see a pretty good split here. Okay, well, thank you all for participating, and now that you are used to being a little interactive with us, please do use the chat box as well. So at this point, if we can get that, there we go. I'd like to turn it over to Jamie for our Spotlight segment.
Great. Thanks very much, Elaine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. I know some of you that have signed on for today's call, so hello to those of you that I do know and others. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you today. As Elaine mentioned, I'm at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the study that I'm presenting on today, we're in our 10th year now, and we've been funded through a number of different organizations to do this work. It's a real example of an NCCOR collaborative project at its heart. Our funding for this project has come from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, most recently from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and also we do a companion study in all state laws on the areas related to school wellness through funding also from the National Cancer Institute. So I think this was one of the very first NCCOR collaborative projects that cut across the NCCOR funders. So we're real pleased to have an opportunity to share some of the results with you today. I'm going to briefly tell you I'm glad we did that poll because after 9+ years of having this wellness policy mandate, I live and breathe this stuff in my sleep, so I just assume everybody else does too. But I'm glad we did the poll because clearly about 2/3 of the people on the call today are maybe a little bit less familiar with the federal requirements. So I will give you a little history of the federal wellness policy requirements, talk about our research that we've been doing, and really highlight findings that we've had over the first 9 years of the wellness policy mandate. And then as Elaine mentioned earlier, we will take questions at the end. We've allowed for about 20 minutes of time at the end of the session for questions, so please do put your questions into the chat box. So in terms of the history, the Wellness Policy Mandate really started with the Child Nutrition and WIC Reauthorization Act of 2004, and it was effective beginning with school year 2006 to 7, and it applies to all school districts in the country that participate in the federal child nutrition programs. So that would include your National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, After School Snacks, Summer Food Service, the Milk Program, so on and so forth. The original law as written was pretty vague. As you can see here, I've included basically the language from the original law. It was truly just goals for nutrition education, physical activity, and other school-based activities related to wellness, guidelines for food sold or served, an assurance that reimbursable meals met the federal standards at the time, some implementation plans, and involvement of 6 key stakeholders in policy development. The next iteration of the Wellness Policy Mandate happened in 2010, and is with the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010, which reauthorized the wellness policy requirement. I've highlighted in blue for you basically the new components that were added to the wellness policy provisions, and it basically expanded the role of the 6 key stakeholders to include not just development but also implementation, review, and updating, having more of a transparency component to it such that school districts would have to inform and update the public on the content and implementation activities, and then measuring and reporting on implementation. And also, it was the first time that it actually provided USDA with the authority to promulgate regulations that were more detailed than the federal legislation. For those of you familiar with legislation in any form, you know that it's typically pretty vague and that the real heart and details come into implementation regulations, and that's exactly what's happened here. So actually, in July of this year, the USDA issued a final rule. It's published in the Federal Register. I've got the citation for you up here on this slide, and I believe that NCCOR can make that available to you after the call as well, a link to that. But it expanded from the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act some of the elements in the wellness policy requirements, particularly the goals for nutrition are no longer just nutrition education, but it's also nutrition promotion and education. Importantly, these goals for nutrition promotion, education, physical activity, and other activities are to be used using evidence-based strategies. This is new language that was included in the final rule that had not been in the prior legislation. It also updated the guideline requirements for food sold or served on school campuses during the day to not only be consistent with federal meal standards, but also now to be consistent with federal USDA Smart Snack standards, which is another resource perhaps that NCCOR could share with you after the call as well. And then have guidelines for other foods that are provided during the day, such as, somehow my slide got moved, guidelines for other foods that are provided during the day outside of the mealtime or through vending machines or stores or things like that. It also included a component on policies on marketing, restricting marketing to only foods and beverages that met Smart Snacks. it codified into regulation and expansion of the key stakeholders who were to be involved with development, implementation, review, and updating to now specifically include PE teachers and school health professionals. There are 2 new additions to the original 6. Having